That night, the tiny German shepherd he'd rescued laid its head on the former Navy SEAL's chest and uttered a sound no dog should ever have to make. The events that unfolded within a humble Utah rescue shelter, the night a frost-bitten puppy was brought in from the storm, are almost beyond belief. They first thought he was just another lost creature until the moment he opened his mouth and tried to speak. What happened then left the shelter in a stunned, profound silence. This is the incredible story you must hear through to the very end. Let us know where you're watching from. And if this tale truly touches your heart, please subscribe for more. Snow fell in thick, silent sheets over Cedar Ridge, Utah, muffling all noise save for the wind's mournful howl as it swept the frozen valley. Within the walls of the Snow Haven Animal Rescue Center, a lone lamp cast a gentle, warm glow upon the lobby floor. Well past midnight, Jake Walker kept a solitary vigil at the front desk. His hands cupped a coffee mug, its contents now cold and forgotten. The quiet, however, didn't bother him at all. In truth, he welcomed it. Following years of service as a Navy SEAL, silence was the one comfort that did not set his pulse pounding. Jake was a man in his early 40s with broad shoulders on a lean frame, a physique forged by discipline, not by ego. His short-cropped, dark blonde hair was streaked with a few strands of gray at the temples. The faint stubble on his jaw was more habit than neglect. He hadn't ever really learned to fully unwind. A fine, pale scar traced a line on the left of his neck, disappearing under his flannel collar, a relic from a mission that had ended in disaster. His clear blue eyes held a deep weariness reflecting the storms he'd endured. His quiet nature was often found intimidating by others, but to the animals he'd cared for, it meant safety. Tonight the wind cried against the walls like a living thing. Jake put his mug down and walked to the window, watching the storm whip snow into spirals. Out there, the mountains were completely gone, swallowed by a white haze. He thought of his past, of his team, about the dog that didn't make it back from that final mission. It had been 6 years yet. At night, gunfire sometimes echoed softly in his dreams. He worked at Snow Haven because the animals didn't ask questions, and they never stared back at him with pity. A sudden skid of tires broke the quiet. Jake turned toward the front door as it flew open, letting in a gust of freezing wind and snow. "I've got another one!" shouted a woman through her scarf. In her arms was a bundle swaddled in a heavy blue blanket. It was Sarah McKinney, a volunteer firefighter from town. In her early 30s, she was tall and slender, her sharp jawline and skin glowing pink from the biting cold. Her long red hair was tied back in a loose braid, snowflakes caught in the strands like tiny stars. Her voice was always a mix of gentle strength and determination, the kind that came from being used to chaos, but still believing in saving whatever could be saved. Jake moved to meet her, pulling the door shut against the raging wind. "What happened?" he questioned, his voice quiet and gravelly from disuse. Sarah unwrapped the bundle to reveal the small creature tucked inside, a little German shepherd puppy drenched completely, its fur caked with ice and mud. It looked to be no more than 6 or 7 weeks old. The pup trembled violently, its small paws twitching, as if still running from some unseen horror. "I found him by the highway," Sarah gasped out. "Someone dumped him. He must have been chasing the sound of cars." He was just lying in a snowbank, his breath a faint ghost." Jake's jaw clenched hard. He had seen too many souls, human and not abandoned to the unforgiving cold. "Bring him in," he commanded, already striding into the exam room. The rescue center was humble, just 3 rooms and an office, but Jake commanded every single inch of it. The air smelled of sharp antiseptic and warm cedar as the heater's low hum filled the aching silence. He gently placed the pup on a thick towel under the lamp. Up close, the brutal truth was clear. Tiny paws caked in ice. His ears still soft with youth, his fur a matted mess of tan and black. The pup's ribs were a faint outline under his soaked coat, and a single leg trembled uncontrollably, a sign of a sprain or a break. Sarah hovered close, her hands twisting. "Will he make it?" But Jake didn't answer right away. He laid his hand gently on the pup's chest. It was there, weak, unsteady, but there, A heartbeat. His voice softened. Yeah, he's a fighter. There was something in that tiny pulse, so stubborn against all odds, that called to something deep inside him. Jake wrapped the pup in a dry towel and began rubbing to bring warmth, murmuring softly. His words almost silent. The pup's breathing hitched, then evened out. Its small eyes fluttered open, a pale amber shockingly bright in the dim room. For a single long heartbeat those eyes met Jake's. There was no fear, only confusion, and the pure, raw will to survive. Jake froze his thumb stroking the wet fur between the pup's ears. He recognized that look he'd seen it in soldiers who would not break when their entire world had fallen to pieces. It was the defiant look of a survivor. "Hey, little one," Sarah whispered, but the pup's gaze never left Jake's face. He swallowed past an unexpected ache in his throat. The little puppy tried to move, letting out a faint whine that sounded like a broken word. Sarah blinked. "What was that?" Jake asked. His own voice hushed, uncertain. It was a strange sound, not just a cry, but something shaped like a deliberate attempt to answer him. He shook the thought off and focused on the injuries. The right hind leg was swollen with a deep gash running along its flank. "He needs stitches. Get the kit from the cabinet." Sarah obeyed without a single word. They worked in a shared silence, the kind reserved for when there is no room for doubt. Jake cleaned the wound with care, whispering encouragement as much for himself as for the pup. When the sutures were finished, the small shepherd lay quiet, its eyes half closed, its breathing finally slow and steady. Sarah exhaled. "He's a lucky one." Jake nodded, but he couldn't smile. He thought about the word luck, how thin and fragile a thing it was. Snow pressed against the glass like ghosts of storms he'd barely survived. For an instant, he felt the weight of his world shrink down to the tiny, thrumming heartbeat beneath his hand. After Sarah finally departed, the center fell quiet. The wind outside the door moaned its lonely song. Jake stayed beside the heating lamp, watching the small chest rise and fall. He could have gone home to his bed, but he didn't. Instead, he remained listening to the constant rhythm of survival. The very same rhythm that had kept his own heart beating for years. As dawn neared, the storm's fury finally receded. The first light of morning bled over the snow, pale and pristine. Jake rubbed his exhausted eyes, his gaze falling upon the small shepherd. The pup twitched, stretching a paw towards him, and with a voice so faint he almost imagined it, a small fractured sound emerged. A breath that almost became a word. Jake leaned in, every nerve on edge. The puppy's mouth formed the shape once, then twice, and he heard it again, soft, uncertain, but undeniably there. A whisper that seemed to say, "Hey." He went completely still. For a heartbeat, the world ceased to exist. Only him, the pup, and this impossible moment of connection. Somewhere deep inside, buried under years of silence and pain, something inside Jake Walker began to stir. A flicker of warmth he'd long forgotten. Outside, the storm gave way to light. The next morning dawned quietly over Cedar Ridge. A weak sun filtered through the broken clouds, casting a silver light across snow-covered rooftops. Inside Snowhaven, the air was a mix of antiseptic and damp wood. Jake Walker never went home. He hadn't slept a wink. The night's blizzard had passed, yet the tiny life form on the steel table made it impossible for him to leave. The German Shepherd pup, now cleaned and swaddled in a fleece blanket, slept under the heat lamp, its breathing still faint but even. Each rise and fall of that tiny chest felt like a heartbeat on loan from some higher power. Jake sat close by, his elbows on his knees, eyes heavy with exhaustion, yet he refused to succumb to sleep. He had once pushed through 72 hours without sleep on a mission in Kandahar. But this kind of vigil felt different. It was quiet, patient, and deeply protective. When Sarah McKenna came back just after sunrise, the air outside was sharp with frost. Her hair, once a wild, fiery tangle, was now pulled back in a damp but orderly ponytail from the melting snow. She carried 2 steaming cups of coffee in a small paper bag. "You look like hell, Walker," she said, her voice gentle, yet edged with real concern. Sarah was the type who could whisper to a wounded animal and then bark orders at a seasoned firefighter in the very next breath. She passed him a cup, her eyes on the sleeping pup. "How's our little guy doing?" Jake took the coffee with a grateful nod. "Yeah. He's alive for now." His voice was hoarse, as if worn down by both exhaustion and emotion. She moved closer to the table, her expression softening as she gazed at the little dog. "He's a fighter. I guess you two have that in common." Jake let out a quiet grunt that could have been a laugh, but he offered no reply. The truth was that single, unbelievable sound the puppy had uttered hours ago was still replaying in his mind. He tried to dismiss it as a trick of his tired brain, but the feeling it left behind simply would not fade. He had built a life on trusting his gut, and his gut was telling him that sound was deliberate, a bond forged beyond all logic. As morning bled into the afternoon, the shelter slowly woke up to its familiar rhythm. The volunteer receptionist Martha Hill bustled in, a warm woman in her 50s with salt and pepper curls and kind brown eyes behind her large glasses. She had a tendency to hum old country songs as she worked, and the gentle scent of her lavender lotion always announced her arrival. "Morning, Jake," she chirped, her eyes finding the puppy. "Well, now, aren't you just a little miracle?" Martha's husband had been gone 2 years now, lost to cancer, leaving her to fill her days by mending broken creatures and brewing too much tea. Her compassion was the very soul of this place. Jake offered her a quiet, knowing nod. "He's a new one. Found him on the highway." "Oh, the poor thing." Martha breathed, her hand instinctively rising to her heart. "You'll have him up and running in no time." But Jake knew this recovery would be a fragile, hard-won battle. The pup was still so weak, one leg carefully bandaged. His small body shuddered as if haunted by the ghosts of the road. It was a tremor Jake recognized he'd seen it in soldiers, men who weren't recoiling from a wound, but from the deafening echo of fear. By midday, the shelter had quieted. Jake carefully sterilized the exam table before preparing a small bowl of warm formula. He tested the drop on his wrist, then knelt by the gentle glow of the heating lamp. "All right, little guy," he whispered, guiding the bottle to the tiny mouth. The puppy's nose quivered, sensing the warmth. It latched on, hesitant and weak, but the faint, rhythmic sound was the undeniable pulse of a life fighting back. As he watched the little one refuse to give up, something began to mend deep inside him. It was a profound sense of duty, tinged with awe. This was about protecting a spirit that mirrored his own fractured will to live. When the last drop was gone, the feeding was over. The pup let out a tiny hiccup, surrendering to the warmth of the blanket. Jake wiped his hands on a nearby towel and sat back. He just watched for a long moment. "You're gonna be a handful," he muttered. From across the room, Sarah's soft laughter broke the silence. You talk to him like he understands every word." Jake glanced up, a faint smile touching his lips. "Maybe he does." Sarah just shook her head, a warm smile on her face. "You need to sleep, Walker." "I've had enough sleep to last a lifetime." She studied him a moment more, her gaze searching. It was as if she could see right through his disciplined exterior. His posture was all soldier, a hardness that never seemed to soften. But his eyes betrayed him. They were tired, lonely, and carried a guilt too heavy to name. Wisely, Sarah didn't push. "At least eat something," she said, leaving a paper bag on the counter, before disappearing back out into the swirling snow. The afternoon bled into evening. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pale, bruised sky streaked with the day's last light. Inside, Jake gently changed the puppy's dressing, inspecting the clean line of stitches. The wound was beginning to heal. When he was finished, the little pup opened his eyes and simply stared, truly stared, as if committing every detail of this man to memory. Every careful movement, every quiet breath. A raw, untamed intelligence shone in that gaze, and it was undeniable. Jake felt a sudden tightness build in his throat. "You're watching me," he murmured. And the pup answered with a low whine, its tail offering a slow, uncertain wag. Martha's head appeared in the doorway. "Jake, you pulling another all-nighter?" He glanced at the clock. "Yeah, don't lock the doors on me." "Wouldn't dream of it," she replied, with a wink shuffling away with a soft hum. As night fell, a profound stillness settled over the rescue. The only sounds were the quiet thrum of the heater and the weary groan of the old building settling against the cold. Jake took a blanket from a supply closet, spreading it on the floor beside the table. He wasn't planning to sleep just to stand watch. The puppy stirred, and with a clumsy effort dragged itself to the edge of its bedding until one tiny paw made contact with his hand. Jake went still, a small, involuntary smile touching his lips. He turned his hand palm up, feeling the faint, warm whisper of breath on his skin. And there, in the sacred space between waking and sleep, his thoughts drifted back to another dog from another life. Ranger, the K9 partner who had taken a bullet meant for him 6 years ago. The scent of desert dust and blood was still seared into his memory, the whine of the chopper blades lifting them out, and the crushing emptiness that followed. For years he believed a part of him had died on that mission, too, but now looking at this trembling, breathing miracle of life beside him, he wondered if a piece of Ranger had somehow found its way back. The night deepened. Jake finally drifted to sleep for the first time in hours, his own breathing syncing with the pup's. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, a faint noise pulled him from his slumber. He blinked, lost in the dark. The puppy was sitting up, its eyes wide open, staring right at him. Then he heard the sound again, soft, fractured but clear enough to make him sit bolt upright. It wasn't a bark. It was a syllable, a sound forged with intention. "Rem." Jake's heart hammered against his ribs, the name he'd instinctively written on the rescue tag hours earlier. Remy. And now this small creature had whispered it, or something impossibly close. He stared for a long, breathless moment, disbelief giving way to awe. The puppy blinked, then collapsed back onto the blanket, utterly exhausted, as if that single word had cost it everything. Jake swallowed hard and leaned back, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. He couldn't be sure of what he had just witnessed. Perhaps a trick of exhaustion, or maybe it was something more, something no one on Earth would ever believe. All he knew was the shelter, once a tomb of silence, now felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. Outside, the snow began to fall again, gentler this time, a soft whisper against the window pane instead of a raging cry. Jake looked down at the pup, at Remy, whose tiny chest rose and fell in perfect time with his own heartbeat. And for the first time in so long, he felt something unfamiliar and fragile take root inside him. Hope. The morning after Remy's fragile sound, the world outside Snowhaven seemed transformed. A fresh blanket of snow covered the town like a pure white quilt, muffling all noise into a peaceful hush. Inside, the shelter was bathed in the golden light of a low winter sun, pouring through frosted windows. The heater hummed its steady rhythm, the air a mixture of clean antiseptic and the comforting scent of warm hay. And Jake Walker felt a profound shift deep within him, an unfamiliar stillness not of emptiness but of peace. Remy now lay curled in a basket instead of the cold exam table, wrapped in a soft gray fleece, his small head resting on the edge, his eyes tracking Jake's every single move. His recovery had astonished everyone. The swelling in his leg had vanished, and his life force was returning faster than anyone thought possible. He was still undersized for his breed, his paws too big for his tiny frame, but a sharp alertness now shone in his gaze, a spark that reminded Jake of a soldier cautiously mapping out his world after a long, hard battle. Jake moved with a quiet reverence through the room, cleaning surfaces and checking on the other animals, but his gaze was a magnet, always pulling back to the basket. Remy answered each glance, his tail giving a hopeful twitch, his head tilting as if he could understand Jake's thoughts. When Jake spoke even in a whisper, the pup's ears swiveled toward him, his mouth making tiny strange shapes as if he were trying to imitate, to learn to connect. By mid-morning, Sarah McKenna pushed through the shelter door, her boots dripping with melted snow. She had her firefighter jacket on, over a dark sweater, her red hair in a braid to one side, her cheeks flushed with color from the cold. She met Jake with that familiar blend of warmth and playful teasing. "You're still here. I figured you'd have headed home sometime this century." A faint smirk touched Jake's lips. "Couldn't bring yourself to leave him alone yet?" He inclined his head toward the basket where Remy was now sitting up, gazing at them both with those golden eyes that seemed to hold a world of understanding. Sarah knelt, her long fingers gently brushing the puppy's head. "Hey there. A little miracle. You're looking so much stronger today." The pup blinked, then a small sound escaped him, something between a bark and a spoken word. Sarah went still, her eyes wide with shock. "Okay, did you just hear that? It almost sounded like—" Jake arched an eyebrow. "Like he's trying to say something." "Yeah." Sarah let out a laugh, a sound caught between disbelief and pure wonder. "But that's impossible." Isn't it?" Leaning against the counter, Jake crossed his arms. "You'd be surprised what's possible when a life is determined to keep fighting." His voice held a profound gravity, the kind that only belongs to a man who had stared into the abyss too many times. As the day unfolded, a new energy filled the shelter. Martha Hill swept in mid-morning, bringing her customary bag of bagels and the comforting scent of lavender. "And how's my little talker doing?" she chirped, kneeling beside the basket. In response, Remy's tail began to thump. Then he opened his mouth, and a new sound emerged, softer this time, almost like a human sigh. Martha gasped, clasping her hands together. "Lord have mercy, he's practicing." Jake rolled his eyes, but he couldn't fight the faint smile that pulled at the corner of his mouth. "Don't you go encouraging him." But encouragement was already a tangible thing in the air. Each time someone new walked into the room, Remy would respond in his own unique way with small yips that mirrored the cadence of their speech or a tilt of his head timed perfectly with a pause. Even low murmurs that rose and fell in an uncanny mimicry of tone. It wasn't speech, not in the truest sense, but it was something breathtakingly close, a rhythm of profound connection. That afternoon, a local veterinarian doctor, Evan Schultz, stopped in to make his rounds. Evan was in his late 30s, tall and lean, with sandy brown hair and a constant 5 o'clock shadow that hinted at endless hours. Years of grueling emergency shifts had etched fine lines around his eyes, but they were the marks of intense focus, not of exhaustion. "Heard you've got some kind of prodigy in here," he said, a skeptical smirk playing on his lips as he entered. Jake just gestured toward the basket. "See for yourself." Evan crouched down, his examination of Remy marked by a clinical precision. "Vitals are solid. Muscle recovery's looking great for a pup his age." He glanced up at Jake. "You've done incredible work here, though I have to admit." "Bay Area?" This whole part about him trying to talk sounds like someone seriously sleep-deprived. But before Jake could even offer a retort, Remy looked directly at Evan and let out a peculiar, drawn-out sound. "Hey." Evan blinked, then slowly turned his head to Jake. "Okay, maybe I'm the one who needs sleep." Sarah erupted in laughter, clapping her gloved hands together. "Told you so." Evan just shook his head, a look caught somewhere between amusement and genuine unease. "That is uncanny. I've seen brilliant shepherds before, but this little guy, he's something else entirely." Jake simply gave a knowing nod. He didn't need a scientific explanation for it. He'd long ago stopped believing that everything truly real in this world could ever be explained. That evening, after the last volunteer had gone, a deep quiet settled over the shelter once more. The air felt thick with the gentle warmth of life. Jake sat beside Remy's basket, the small pup curled up near his boots. He watched the steady, quiet rhythm of his breathing, the twitch of tiny paws, as if he were chasing rabbits in his dreams. The soldier inside Jake still saw the world in terms of threats and strategies, but tonight that part of his mind felt softer. He thought back to that first sound Remy had made, how impossibly fragile and yet how utterly deliberate it was. He reached down his hand, brushing along the pup's back. The fur was smooth now, the grit and grime a fading memory. "You're healing fast," he whispered. In response, Remy cracked open an eye, a low, contented rumble vibrating from his small chest. A soft chuckle escaped Jake. "Think you're a comedian, don't you?" The pup answered with another deep, resonant rumble, a strange guttural sound that seemed to shape itself into something more than a bark. Jake went still listening intently before whispering, "Do that again." Remy cocked his head, then offered the same haunting, melodic sound. Jake leaned in a disbelieving smile playing on his lips. You're not supposed to be able to do that." He lingered there for a long while, his words soft and low. This wasn't about teaching. It was about connection, about mirroring. Whenever Jake would say something simple like, "Hey," or "Good boy," Remy appeared to echo the very soul of the sound, if not the word itself. It became their private language, a sacred rhythm of call and response, a silent conversation that defied understanding, yet fulfilled a deep, unspoken need. Later that night, Sarah's unexpected return broke the quiet, a container of soup in her hands. "Figured you'd forget to eat," she said, finding him still faithfully beside Remy. "Looks like you two are bonding," she teased, offering the food. "Maybe," he conceded. "It feels like he sees more of me than most people ever have." Her gaze softened with understanding. "Maybe he does. Animals perceive the things we try to hide." For a long moment they simply shared the silence. The only sound was the lonely whisper of the wind against the glass. And then Remy lifted his head and let out another one of those long, vocal sounds, drawing both their gazes. This one was softer, a breath of pure recognition. A gasp of astonishment escaped Sarah's lips. Jake didn't laugh this time. He just smiled. A small, honest smile finally reached his tired eyes. "Yeah," he whispered. "I hear you." The night deepened, wrapping the shelter in its quiet warmth. The heater ticked softly while snow outside fell in lazy spirals. Inside, 2 humans and 1 small dog were bound by a fragile miracle, a language forged not from words, but from unwavering trust, survival, and something deeper that science could never explain, nor memory could define. In that moment, Jake understood that Remy wasn't learning to speak. He was teaching Jake how to truly listen again. Outside, the wind carried the first hopeful whisper of winter's end. Snowhaven was filled with the scent of pine shavings, warm coffee, and life. It was the scent of quiet healing. As morning light poured through the tall windows, bathing everything in an amber glow, Jake Walker felt a sensation that was almost foreign peace. Remy was on his feet again, his gait still unsteady, clumsy with newfound youth. His small leg had mended with a speed that defied all expectation, leaving just a faint silver scar beneath his soft tan coat. He was still so small, barely 10 weeks old, yet his movements were now sure, his eyes burning bright with an undeniable spirit. From the counter, Jake watched him, a file held forgotten in one hand, the other resting quietly on his knee. The little pup trotted over, stopped at Jake's boots, and gently pressed a paw against his leg. It had become their silent ritual, a check-in, a wordless promise of, "I'm here." It made Jake's heart ache in the best way. Sarah arrived not long after sunrise. She brought the cold morning with her, a scent of frost and engine oil clinging to her coat. Her fire truck was parked just outside, a slash of brilliant red against the white canvas of the snow. Her heavy coat was unzipped, showing a navy turtleneck and a silver pendant that caught the light. Her autumn-bright hair cascaded freely today, soft curls brushing against her shoulders. "Mornin', soldier." She offered her voice, light, but her gaze full of warmth. It was what she called him now, part gentle tease, part earnest respect. "Your recruit's up early," she murmured, crouching to scratch Remy's chin. He leaned into her hand, his tail a furious, happy blur. "Yeah," Jake answered, placing his mug down. He doesn't believe in wasting daylight. A soft smile touched Sarah's lips. Neither do you. An unspoken truth hung in her voice, a delicate balance of admiration and a deep, knowing understanding. She knew the fragments of Jake's story, the deployments, the honors, and the heavy silence that followed it all. She never pressed for the details, but she possessed the quiet intuition of a soul who had shouldered her own losses. Her husband, a smoke jumper, was lost to a wildfire 2 years ago. She had shared this with Jake once in the low light of a quiet shelter night. Since that moment, words became unnecessary. They saw the reflection of their own sorrow in each other's eyes. Remy padded softly about the room, his curiosity sparked by everything. The clang of steel bowls, the whisper of straw in the kennels, the clean scent of disinfectant. He would pause every few moments to glance back, checking that Jake was watching. Each time a slight curve touched Jake's lips, a gentleness had settled in him that wasn't there weeks before. The rigid lines etched into his face appeared to have softened, as if Remy's devoted presence had smoothed the jagged edges of his memory. By mid-morning, Martha Hill made her shuffling entrance, carrying her enormous tote bag and a box of blueberry muffins. Gray curls escaped from a knitted beanie adorned with a purple pom-pom. "Muffins," she announced, "and coffee that doesn't taste like sadness." She sent a wink toward Jake, who chuckled softly. "Remy's a local celebrity, you know. Folks at the diner won't stop chattering about the talking pup." Jake groaned, though his eyes were light. "Just what we need, a fan club," he grumbled. "Oh, don't you be such a sour puss," Martha chided, passing him a muffin. "A little joy never hurt anybody." As the morning wore on, the shelter filled with its little symphony of life, the sound of dogs barking, cats meowing, the low drone of the heaters. Yet amidst the chaos, a quiet harmony resonated between Jake and Remy, a bond that felt almost sacred. When Jake spoke, Remy listened with his entire soul, not merely with his ears. When Jake grew silent, Remy would bridge the quiet with soft sounds, low hums, and whines that perfectly matched his tone. It was as though they communicated on a frequency tuned only for them. That afternoon, Dr. Evan Schultz came by for a follow-up exam. His typical light-hearted manner was shaded with intrigue. "He's healing way ahead of schedule," he noted, inspecting Remy's leg. "If I didn't know better, I'd think you're feeding him rocket fuel." Jake smirked. "Disciplined doc. Works on most species." Evan grinned back. "That, and he's completely devoted to you." He stood up straight, crossing his arms. "I've seen some intense bonds with service dogs. But this is something else entirely. It's like he's in perfect sync with you." Jake didn't deny it. "The feeling's mutual." Evan's brow furrowed. "Ever consider training him? He has that intense focus. Could make a hell of a SAR dog." Jake's eyes drifted to the window, to the snow glittering on the branches. "I've trained dogs before," he said, his voice low. "It didn't end well." Evan caught the heavy undertone, but didn't push it. "Well, maybe it's time for a different kind of ending," he offered, patting Remy's head on his way out. As evening settled in, Sarah and Jake shared a quiet dinner in the staff kitchen. The air was thick with the scent of chili and warm bread. Remy lay by the door, a silent guardian, his eyes half closed, but ears tracking every faint noise. Jake took his time eating, lost in the soft static of the corner radio. "Do you ever wonder," Sarah started, her voice gentle, "that maybe he found you for a reason?" Jake met her gaze, the right words lost to him. "You're talking about fate." She gave a small shrug. "Call it whatever you like. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with a choir of angels. Sometimes they arrive limping through a blizzard." The thought struck him. For so long, his world was built on nothing but cause and effect. But Remy? Remy had changed everything. That little pup had crawled from the freezing cold, and right into the void in his life, a missing heartbeat he never knew was gone. Later, a deep quiet settled over the shelter. Jake was in his office where his desk lamp cast a warm, golden circle on a pile of adoption files. The words were unread. He was simply listening to the faint rhythm of Remy's breathing in the adjacent room. It was a steady, reassuring sound. Leaning back in his chair, his eyes drifted toward the small metal insignia on the wall. A tarnished Navy SEAL trident. For so many years it had stood for duty, sacrifice, and unbearable loss. But now it was a simple reminder that he was still alive. Remy padded into the room, dragging his favorite blanket in his teeth. He stopped beside Jake's chair, let the blanket fall at his feet, and gently pressed a paw against his leg. A smile broke through. "All right, you win," he murmured, lowering himself to the floor. Remy eagerly climbed into his lap. He curled into a ball with an almost human sigh. Jake laid a hand on his back, feeling the fragile, steady heartbeat beneath his palm. His thoughts drifted back to all those sleepless nights spent waiting for the next order, the next mission, the next inevitable loss. Yet here in this quiet little place, there were no missions left to run, no more battles to be fought. Just two broken souls learning how to breathe again. As midnight approached, the storm outside finally gave way to a profound silence. In that quiet, Jake realized he didn't hear the ghosts of the past in the wind anymore, just the soft sound of life. The sound of two souls once shattered, now healing together. He whispered more to himself than the pup. "We're gonna be okay." "Kid?" Remy stirred in his sleep, pressing closer before settling again. The overhead light flickered once, then held steady. And for the first time in an eternity, Jake Walker closed his eyes, not from exhaustion, but from peace. The night fell silently on Cedar Ridge. A deep cold settled in, making the stars look sharper than ever. The rescue center sat at the edge of town, a lone lantern in the snow, its windows casting a soft amber glow into the frozen darkness. Inside, all was quiet. The only sounds were the furnace's low hum and the gentle breathing of sleeping animals. In his small office, Jake Walker leaned back in his chair, with exhaustion etched into his features. The day had been a grind, a shipment of supplies arriving late. A new, half-starved stray had been brought in, and paperwork was stacked in towers around him. But over in the corner, Remy was curled up on a worn blanket, a single paw twitching as he chased something in his sleep. The pup was bigger now, almost 3 months old, his sleek black and tan coat shimmering under the single lamp. His chest was a little broader, his steps more confident, but his eyes still held the bright wonder of a puppy seeing the world anew. There were moments Jake found himself just watching him, astonished at how such a small being could fill the vast, empty spaces of his life. Near midnight, the wind changed its tune. Jake felt it deep in his bones, an old soldier's instinct for a silence that was all wrong. The heater's steady, comforting drone sputtered once, twice, and then died completely. The hum was gone, replaced by the low groaning of the roof as it buckled under the frost. Within moments, a deep chill began to seep in, the very warmth of the air bleeding away. Jake stood, a curse on his lips, and made his way to the control panel. The ancient boiler, a relic older than the shelter itself, had finally given up the ghost. He swore under his breath. Perfect timing. Remy lifted his head ears at full attention, his eyes tracking Jake's every move. "It's all right, pal," Jake said softly, grabbing a flashlight and his jacket. "We got this." The pup's nails clicked a soft rhythm on the cold concrete as he followed close behind. The boiler room was a cramped, cold tomb of metal pipes and ghosts of dust in the back. Jake knelt down, prying open the old panel. The acrid smell of burnt wiring hit him instantly. "Great," he muttered. "Out for the night. Maybe the week." He'd have to call Hank Dillard, the town's jack-of-all-trades, come morning. Hank was a heavy-set man in his 50s with weathered hands, a graying beard, and a laugh that came easy despite a lifetime of hard work. But at this ungodly hour, waking him would be pointless. Jake returned to the main hall, pulling armfuls of blankets from the supply closet. He went from kennel to kennel, draping the blankets, murmuring assurances to the anxious animals as the temperature plummeted. He could see his breath clouding in the air now. Remy stayed right with him, his body alert, but poised, pacing the rooms like a sentry on duty. A half hour crept by before Jake saw the pup freeze near the back door, tail stiff as a board ears erect. A low whine rumbled in his throat. Jake frowned. "What is it?" Remy scratched at the door, whimpering louder, then let out a bark. It was a sharp, urgent sound that made Jake's own heart hammer in his chest. He opened the door a crack, the frigid night air slicing in like a razor. "Remy, inside," he commanded, but the dog was a flash of fur bolting out into the blizzard. "Remy!" Jake shouted, grabbing his coat and light, and charging after him into the white chaos. The wind lashed his face, and his boots plunged into the deep snow with each desperate crunch. The beam of his flashlight cut a frantic path through the swirling flakes, chasing the tiny paw prints that led behind the shelter. And then he saw it. A small, dark shape slumped against the fence, half swallowed by the snow. Remy was circling it, barking insistently, digging frantically with his paws. Jake raced forward and fell to his knees. It was a fawn, a mere baby, impossibly thin, and trembling, its fur stiff with ice. Its tiny sides barely moved, fighting for air. Jake's heart seized in his chest. "You clever little devil," he whispered, fumbling in his jacket for a towel. He wrapped the fragile animal with care and lifted it against his body. The fawn's eyes flickered open, two weak, glassy orbs reflecting the light. He looked over at Remy, whose tail gave a single solid wag, but whose eyes stayed locked on the fawn with an almost human concern. Jake shook his head in disbelief. "You heard it, didn't you?" he said, his voice thick with emotion. The pup tilted his head, muzzle dusted with snow, as if to say he had. "Yes." Together they hurried back inside, sealing the door tight against the raging storm. Beneath the heating lamps, Jake made a space in the main kennel. He gently laid the fawn down, wrapping it in a cocoon of blankets, and began rubbing its fragile body, trying to coax life back into its limbs. Remy stayed close, a soft, worried whine in his throat, licking the tiny creature's ears as if pleading with it to fight. For the next hour, Jake worked in focused silence, his movements precise and practiced. His hands recalled the art of triage, that strange calm found in tending to the wounded, while chaos howled just beyond the walls. Then gradually the fawn's breathing evened out. Its legs twitched with a flicker of life as a soft cry escaped its throat. Jake finally exhaled, profound relief washing over him. He looked down at Remy, whose loyal gaze had never once wavered. "You saved it," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. The pup's tail gave a single, slow, proud thump. By dawn, the shelter's air had turned to ice, but every animal was safe. Jake had managed to get an emergency propane heater running in the office, creating a pocket of warmth for the smallest rescues. He finally slumped against the wall, bone-weary. Remy curled up at his side, resting his head trustingly on Jake's thigh. His eyes half closed, but ever watchful, a silent sentinel for both the man and the fawn. When morning finally broke, Sarah arrived early, bundled in her heavy firefighter's coat, her breath a cloud of mist in the frigid air. Her eyes went wide as she stepped inside. "My God, Jake, it's an icebox in here!" Then her gaze fell on the fawn. "Is that—" Jake just nodded. "Found it outside, or more accurately, he did." He gestured to Remy, who lifted his head with quiet pride. Sarah knelt down, running her gloved hand gently over the delicate creature. "You can't be serious. He found this in that blizzard?" A tired smile touched Jake's lips. "He wouldn't let up until I followed him." Sarah looked up at him, her face a mixture of pure awe and deep admiration. "You've got a real hero on your hands." The story spread through town faster than a wildfire. By that afternoon, everyone had heard about the miracle dog of Snowhaven. Folks started stopping by, bringing donations and thermoses of coffee, some just wanting to see Remy. Martha was beaming like a proud grandmother, telling the story to anyone who would listen, how the dog saved the fawn, and how Jake braved the storm to see it through. Even Hank Dillard came by to fix the heater, personally shaking his head in sheer amazement. "You've got a damn smart one there." Walker died he said, wiping his hands on his overalls. "You better watch him. He might just start running this place himself." Jake just laughed quietly, watching Remy trot around his tail wagging as kids pressed their hands against the kennels to wave. The pup seemed unfazed by all the attention, his focus still locked on the fawn, who was now standing on wobbly legs in a small pen nibbling at hay. There was an almost sacred devotion in the way Remy stayed near, a gentle yet unwavering protector. That evening, after the last visitors had gone, and a quiet calm settled over the shelter, Jake stood in the doorway watching the sunset bleed into a deep violet. He thought about the impossible thread that had bound his life to this place, to this dog. He'd come to Snowhaven searching for quiet, for a way to simply vanish. But somehow, here in the middle of broken heaters and second chances, he was finding his own purpose again. Remy trotted to his side, pressing his body firmly against his leg. Jake looked down, a faint smile forming. "You've got instincts I'll never comprehend," he said softly. Remy gazed up. Ears perked, his eyes catching the last light of dusk. The man who had lived by orders and mere survival now found himself at the center of a quiet miracle. He was a soldier being reborn, all because of the courage of a small dog who refused to let the faintest cry for help go unanswered. And for Jake Walker, that was everything. As March arrived, the snows of Cedar Ridge finally began to surrender, receding from the roads and rooftops like a weary spirit. At Snowhaven, patches of dark earth broke through near the fences, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the air carried the promise of pine and damp earth instead of the bite of frost. Inside the shelter, warm sunlight flooded the concrete floor where Jake Walker stood framed by the doorway, watching Remy charge through the melting drifts outside. The puppy was no longer a fragile soul with trembling legs. He had blossomed into a striking young German shepherd with powerful shoulders, a lustrous coat, and eyes that held a fierce intelligence. His stride was certain, his every move deliberate, the puppyish stumble now replaced by a profound self-assurance. But what truly took Jake's breath away was not the dog's physical power. It was the depth of his soul. Remy seemed to know his commands before they were even formed, reading gestures and tone with an instinct that went beyond words. When Jake gave a low whistle, the dog halted his sprint, swiveled his head, and trotted back, a look of pure pride in his eyes. Jake couldn't help but smile. Show off. Life at Snowhaven had been transformed since the night of the miracle. The tale of Remy's rescue of the fawn had traveled far beyond the borders of Cedar Ridge. Newspapers had picked up the story, a local reporter even came calling. A determined young woman named Dana Cooper Petite, dark-haired with penetrating eyes, and a spirit that electrified any room she entered. She arrived bundled in a red scarf, a large camera in hand, declaring, "The world needs a story just like this one." Dana had a journalist's relentless energy, inquisitive-driven, and always wearing a half-smile, as if she'd already uncovered the heart of every story. She interviewed a hesitant Jake, her questions probing at themes of heroism, destiny, and whether Remy's unique voice was real. Jake answered with caution, his tone quiet yet detached, trying to steer her away from spectacle. "He's just a remarkably smart dog," he'd insisted, "and I was in the right place at the right time." But then Dana knelt down, whispering, "Hello there, little hero." And Remy had tilted his head, his tail sweeping the floor, and let out a soft sound that was the unmistakable echo of, "Hi." Dana's jaw literally dropped, and in that instant, Remy became known as the talking dog of Utah. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind that Jake could have done without. People flocked to the shelter not just to find a pet, but to witness the legend of Remy. Some brought gifts. Others just yearned to see the bond that made the news. Jake handled it all with a quiet grace, patient but deeply uncomfortable with the spotlight. Sarah, always that perfect mix of compassion and fire, loved to tease him about it. "You know you could be charging for these photo ops and raise some real money for this place." Jake's smirk was barely there, but genuine. "Not gonna happen." Sarah just laughed, tucking a lock of her fiery hair behind her ear. "You're allergic to the spotlight, Walker, and you're allergic to silence," he shot back. and she just beamed. Their bond had forged itself in the crucible of winter, built on quiet companionship, wry humor, and a deep, unspoken respect. Sarah had made a habit of stopping by after her shifts, often with coffee or the day's leftovers, helping Jake fix up the kennels or organize donations. Her presence filled the shelter with a warmth he hadn't known was missing. Sometimes she'd just watch Jake working with Remy, studying the soft-spoken commands, the way the dog seemed to echo his every quiet motion, and she saw them as kindred spirits, mirror images of discipline and loyalty, each nursing a quiet ache within. By late March, Remy's voice had gained a profound strength. It wasn't human speech in the literal sense, but something more uncanny patterns of tone and sound driven by rhythm and true intent. When Sarah would wish him good morning, he'd answer with a bright, chirped, "Morn." When Martha arrived daily, her hands smelling of lavender, humming a cheerful tune, Remy would greet her with a soft hum that perfectly matched her melody. And when Jake returned from his errands, the pup would race to the door, a low rumble in his chest forming the undeniable shape of a "hey." This was no mere parlor trick. It was genuine recognition, a soul-deep connection. And for that, the people of Cedar Ridge absolutely adored him. The shelter started getting letters from families who wrote that Remy's story had given them hope again. Donations began flowing in from as far as Colorado, some with notes attached saying, "For the miracle dog who reminded us all to care." Jake was overwhelmed by it all. He had spent years trying to be invisible, and now the world was calling him a hero again, a title he had long since stopped wanting. But as he watched Remy roll in the patchy snow covered in mud and pure joy, he knew this kind of heroism felt different. This wasn't born from orders or missions. It was born from love. One afternoon, as melting snow traced gentle streams along the shelter's foundation, Dr. Evan Schultz arrived for a checkup. His worn leather jacket carried the faint scent of antiseptic, and Pine, his sandy hair, a little more wind-tousled than usual. He greeted Jake with his usual half-smile. "You two made the papers again. They're calling him a genius." Jake just shrugged. "He's just Remy." Evan knelt beside the dog, checking his teeth and weight. "He's exceptional. Ever think of training him officially? So, he could easily qualify as a therapy dog, maybe even search and rescue." A shadow flickered across Jake's eyes, a ghost of old pain. "I've thought about it." Evan leaned back, studying him intently. "You're afraid you'll lose him," he said, plain and simple. Jake didn't answer. The truth hung in the air between them, a silent, heavy thing. That evening, Sarah returned in her firefighter sweatshirt, carefully carrying 2 mugs of steaming hot cocoa. She found Jake sitting on the steps, watching Remy chase the last rays of daylight. The air smelled of thawing earth, of a world waking from its long sleep. She handed him a mug and sat. "He's special, you know," she said softly. "People feel something when they see him." Jake nodded, his gaze distant. "Yeah, I guess I do too." They sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, the steady drip of melting snow filling the space between their breaths. Remy trotted over, dropping a small pine cone in Jake's lap. It was a new habit of his, collecting these little treasures to share. Jake let out a soft laugh, tossing it gently. "You're getting sentimental." Remy answered with a sharp huff that sounded remarkably like, "No." Sarah burst out laughing, her hand flying to her mouth. "I swear he just argued with you." A rare, easy grin spread across Jake's face. Wouldn't be the first time. As the sky bled into a deep indigo, the 3 of them remained right there, wrapped in the quiet harmony of a thawing world. For Jake, the bitter cold inside him, forged by years of grief and guilt and isolation, had finally begun to melt, just like the winter all around them. Every sound Remy made, every laugh Sarah let slip, every small act of kindness inside that humble shelter chipped away at the fortress of ice he'd built around his heart. As night finally fell, at the threshold of the quiet room, Jake extinguished the lights, plunging them into shadow one by one. Remy padded faithfully at his side, a deep yawn escaping him. "Time to turn in." "Buddy," Jake whispered. The young dog answered with a soft bark, a sound that was both consent and pure devotion. Jake sank to one knee, gently stroking the soft fur behind his ears. "You're the very soul of this place, you know that—" In response, Remy leaned in, pressing his head against Jake's shoulder, an unspoken language of trust. Beyond the walls, the final vestiges of winter surrendered to the earth, while within Snowhaven a profound warmth radiated through every space. The soldier and his dog, they had finally found their sanctuary. Their peace wasn't won on a battlefield, but in the quiet, unyielding miracle of a love that had blossomed where only frost had reigned. A gentle spring dawned over Cedar Ridge, the last glittering remnants of frost dissolving into the soil like distant, faded memories. The peaks shimmered in the sunlight, streams swelled with the rush of melted snow, and the air carried the scent of pine and rebirth. Down at Snowhaven, birds lined the fences, their melodies intertwining with the gentle barks of the dogs, in a chorus that welcomed the new day. Within a golden, forgiving sunlight streamed across the kennels. Jake Walker stood framed in the open doorway, a coffee mug cradled in his hands, his eyes fixed on Remy as he bounded through the yard. The German Shepherd had matured into a truly magnificent animal, his form lean and powerful, with defined muscles rippling beneath a dense coat that shone with hues of gold and black. His ears were perpetually alert, his amber eyes held a keen but gentle light, and every movement echoed the disciplined grace Jake himself once carried in the field. Yet unlike any soldier, Remy's strength was tempered with an infectious joy. He was driven by more than mere instinct. He was alive with a profound sense of purpose. Together they had forged a routine that was their own. Mornings began before dawn with feeding and checking water and mending fences. Remy shadowed his every move as if committing a new military drill to memory. If Jake lifted a pail, Remy would grip it with his teeth to help. When Jake swept a kennel, Remy would retrieve the very broom handle he knew was off limits for chewing. Jake would feign a reprimand, but the slight curl of his lips always betrayed the deep affection beneath his stoic exterior. The shelter, once a silent testament to hard work, now pulsed with a new energy. Visitors still arrived, initially lured by tales of the dog who could speak, but that notoriety had since mellowed into a warm familiarity. They came not only to witness Remy, but to experience what he symbolized, hope. Sarah McKinney was a frequent visitor in the evenings, her vibrant laughter often echoing off the cabin's timber walls. With the changing season, her heavy firefighter's coat was replaced by jeans and a soft flannel, her fiery hair catching the sunlight like threads of spun copper. She'd often arrive bearing fresh supplies, or with a newly rescued stray from the far edges of town in tow. Her connection with Jake had grown stronger, nurtured not by words but in the profound comfort of their shared silences. Some nights she would stay late, helping him count donations or fix a stubborn hinge. Their conversations were always about the simple things, the best brand of coffee, the unpredictable weather, the stray kitten that finally found a home with a family out in Denver. But underneath these simple talks, a much deeper connection was taking root, unspoken and unhurried, like a seed patiently waiting for the perfect season to grow. And Remy absolutely adored her. Her arrival was always met with a joyful sprint, his tail wagging with the relentless rhythm of a metronome set to pure bliss. She'd drop to her knees to scratch that favorite spot behind his ears, her soft laughter filling the air as he earnestly tried to echo her voice. "Hello there," she would say, and his muffled "ha" in reply would send her into peals of laughter, leaving Jake to just shake his head in fond, smiling disbelief. One late April afternoon, a white pickup truck crunched its way up the dirt road toward Snowhaven. A tall, solidly built man emerged, his khaki uniform bearing the county rescue insignia stitched proudly on his sleeve. Captain Douglas Reeves, head of the Regional Search and Rescue Division, carried the unmistakable air of command. He was in his early 50s, with close-cropped silver hair and sun-weathered skin, his every movement deliberate and steady. His eyes, a steely gray that missed nothing, held a calm that had been etched into him by years of leading teams through mountains and disaster zones. He extended a hand to Jake. "Walker, I hear you've got yourself a four-legged miracle." Jake met his firm handshake. "He's no miracle, just smarter than most folks." Douglas offered a faint smile. "Humility, a rare trait in a hero." His gaze shifted to Remy, watching from the porch with his head tilted in curiosity. "Mind if I see what he's capable of?" Jake paused, a flicker of unease at the thought of putting Remy through drills, but he finally gave a slow nod. "All right." They walked out to the open field behind the shelter, where Douglas sent a worn leather glove sailing across the grass, his movements sharp and precise. "Let's start simple," he said. Jake offered a single, silent gesture, the same signal he once used for military dogs, and Remy exploded forward, a dark blur cutting through the air. He was on the glove in seconds, scooped it up gently, and trotted back, his eyes shining with purpose. Douglas let out an impressed, low whistle. "He has instinct and restraint. That's a rare combination." Jake knelt by Remy, a hand stroking his fur. "He listens. That's half the battle." Douglas's voice softened. "We could use a dog like him on the mountain rescue team. Think about it." He pressed a card into Jake's hand before heading back to his truck. As the engine's sound faded away, Sarah turned to Jake, her eyes filled with curiosity. "Would you do it, train him for search and rescue?" Jake's gaze fell to Remy, who had gently placed the glove at his feet, his tail sweeping the ground. "He's already rescued me," he answered softly, "and that's more than enough." In the days that followed, life at Snowhaven settled into a rhythm as peaceful as a spring rain, even as the shelter grew busier with new animals. There were abandoned kittens, a weary old collie, even a one-eyed barn owl delivered carefully by a park ranger. Every creature found solace in the quiet warmth of Jake's voice and the ever-watchful gaze of Remy. People began calling them the Guardians of Snowhaven. It was a title Jake no longer pushed away. Then, on a bright Sunday morning, the town gathered for a small fair celebrating winter's end, with stalls lining Main Street overflowing with handmade crafts, food, and laughter. Snowhaven had its own booth, marked by a wooden sign beautifully carved by Hank Dillard himself, that read, "Where Hope Finds a Home." Jake stood behind the table with Sarah and Martha, while Remy rested nearby, his tail sweeping lazily as children gathered to pet him. One little girl, no more than 6 years old, shyly whispered, Can he really talk?" Jake knelt down with a warm smile. "Why don't you ask him yourself?" The girl giggled, leaned in close, and whispered, "Hi, Remy." The shepherd simply tilted his head, and then replied with a soft, perfect hi. A wave of delighted laughter and applause swept through the crowd as the girl's eyes grew wide with wonder. "He said it. He really said it." She threw her arms around Remy, who answered with a gentle lick to her cheek. A feeling tightened in Jake's chest, not the familiar ache of sorrow, but something pure and whole, a warmth that lingered long after the applause had faded away. As the fair's last echoes faded and a golden sunset bathed the town, Jake lingered by the booth, his gaze following the last of the departing crowd. Sarah drew near her arm, gently brushing his as they shared a comfortable silence. "Do you ever wonder," she began, softly breaking the quiet, "that you were meant to be here not by chance, but by some greater design?" Jake pondered her question, his eyes tracing the silhouette of the mountains. "I used to think life was just about surviving," he admitted in a low voice. "Now I believe it's about finding what's truly worth surviving for." As they returned to the shelter that evening, the last vestiges of daylight spilled through the glass, painting the room in a warm, ethereal glow. Jake opened the door, and Remy trotted dutifully ahead, checking every corner as he always did. The soldier followed his loyal dog, the man, and the animal now bound by something far deeper than mere loyalty. In the settling quiet, Jake knelt beside Remy's bed, burying a hand in his fur. "We did good today, pal, didn't we?" he whispered. Remy answered by pressing his muzzle into Jake's hand, closing his eyes in silent accord. Outside, the first stars began to pierce the twilight, soft, unwavering lights against an endless sky. And inside, Snowhaven hummed with the pulse of life, of warmth, and of second chances. Two souls once adrift had finally found their way home. Not a place, but a presence. And as a new dawn broke over Cedar Ridge, the rescue center was bathed in the morning light, its very walls whispering tales of healing joy and love reborn. In the end, this dawn of rescued souls is more than a story of a man and a dog. It's a quiet testament that miracles aren't always loud declarations. Sometimes they arrive in the quiet form of devotion, of forgiveness, and in the simple, profound grace of a new morning. Maybe God doesn't always send his angels with wings. Sometimes he sends them on 4 paws to bring warmth into the coldest, most forgotten corners of our hearts. And maybe, just maybe, every act of kindness we extend becomes a small piece of that miracle in this world. If this story resonated with your heart, please take a moment to share it with someone who needs a beacon of hope today. And leave a comment for us below. Let us know your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that show us God's quiet grace in our daily lives. May the Lord bless and keep you, and may he fill your days with the quiet, gentle miracles of love and everlasting light.